Hi, happy Monday. So, as always, when I get the same question a number of times, I usually hop on here and share some perspective. And the question that's been coming up from both a few men and also women lately has to do around the topic of desire. So, I have workers outside my house today, so hopefully none of the noise transfers through the microphone. So yeah, the topic of desire is quite an interesting one, and I think people have often asked me this question because they know that I've spent a lot of time in monasteries, and they also know that I've spent a large portion of my life in Asia. So there's a difference in culture, obviously, and there's also different, shall we say, there's a different essence in terms of what we all understand by desire. One important thing to put out there from the beginning is that it's important to realize from an Asian perspective, whether people identify with being Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucianist, whichever philosophy or whichever mindset or religion people identify with, the majority of these people are lay people. They are regular homemakers. Many of them have families, they have children, they have wives, they have jobs. They are not people that are monks or nuns. Like the majority of the population are not living in monasteries. The majority of the population have not taken vows of celibacy. So it's important to keep that in perspective. And the other thing is that in terms of desire, everybody has desire. It just depends very much on the intention and where this desire is actually coming from. So the essence of desire in the West is very much sexually orientated, which is somewhat different to the understanding of desire, which is all, like the all-encompassing topic of desire from an Asian perspective. It depends very much on if this is coming from a place of being self-serving or from being, wholesomeness, if there's a level of wholesomeness within desire. One fundamental difference between Asia and the West is that from the very beginning of education and even prior to education, from very, very early ages, children in Asia are taught self-awareness and they are taught self-regulation. Whereas in the West, we essentially don't have this as part of our education system. So we go to school and we start consuming information and data from a very early age, but we aren't taught any level of self-awareness. So for many people, there really isn't a sense of self. So when there's no sense of self, and we pretty much jump into an education system, and then from there we leapfrog into getting jobs and, following pretty much what the rest of the culture is doing, a lot of people get to a phase of life, maybe in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and sometimes, later on into their 60s or 70s, where they suddenly start questioning, and whether it's due to illness or whether it's due to just simply not being happy with what they have and where they are in life, they suddenly look around themselves and realize that all of the things that they have essentially desired or consumed or, surrounded themselves with isn't what they want. And this is what then leads them to kind of go on a search. A lot of people head to Asia on a search of trying to get the answers, when really it's just about cultivating a sense of self. And so having a sense of self is that you know your true nature. Every aspect of your own nature is really what we're striving to learn. Knowing your triggers, knowing what is wholesome, knowing what you want out of life, and pursuing that in an intentional way without causing harm. So that's very important, especially when the conversation is wrapped up around desire, is that from a Western perspective, again and again, I've moved to North America a year ago, and having lived in Asia for the majority of 16 years, it's been quite interesting adapting to the culture because, without coming across as being arrogant or kind of brutal in what I'm saying, is that for me, I'm seeing very much a consumer culture. Everything is kind of driven towards the things that you have. A lot of narcissistic behavior. and a lot of kind of confusion in terms of people not really questioning anything. So the media has a large influence on this, politicians have a large influence on this, and people don't really step back and consider their own sense of self, their own intentions, and their own desires before they respond or interact with people around them. Whereas from an Asian standpoint, community harmony is valued almost beyond everything. So this is cultivated from a very early age, is that your desires should come from a wholesome place. Now, when you get into conversations regarding sexuality, this is the one thing that has the capacity to cause harm. So if we look at the yoga teachings or the Buddhist teachings, the Hindu teachings, pretty much all Asian philosophies, is that we try to do no harm. Keeping in mind there are a lot of people in Asia that don't follow their own teachings. This has to do with culture. It doesn't have to do with the philosophy or the teachings or the religions. Same for, the same could be said for Islam. We see fundamentalist and harmful behavior, but this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the religion. It has to do with the culture. So for me, the benefit is that having lived in and traveled through approximately 33 or 35 countries, is that I have a very broad perspective of different cultures and how different cultures interact with one another, whether they're homogenous societies, meaning everybody is the same, for example, Japan, or whether it's a mixed culture, a bit like a melting pot, so something like Canada. This broad lens allows me to have a perspective and question things for myself and put things into perspective, not only for myself but also for other people that I work with, which has a lot to do with why Cellular Life Wellness exists in the first place, is that I realize there is a huge difference between what Asia has to offer and what the West has to offer at the moment. So everyone has desire, right? My desire, my fundamental desire, is that I know what I do for a living, running this business and owning this school, is what I love. My intentions are wholesome. My intentions are to contribute to society in a wholesome way, to help people through through their own stumbling blocks, to ask them questions and give them different perspectives so that they can then make sense of struggles for themselves. So my job is not to give anybody answers, but it is to more so give you questions so that you can consider different perspectives and then make decisions for yourself. So this is definitely, it falls under the realm of desire. But I think the question was more asked from the perspective of sexuality. And so like us, sexuality is the one thing that has the capacity to cause harm. And so when it comes to relationships, I never give advice on relationships. Again, I give questions and I ask people to consider different aspects of their relationship, primarily with themselves. Because if you don't have a strong sense of self to begin with, and you're not clear on your own intentions to begin with yourself, and you're struggling to not cause harm to yourself, it's going to have a ripple effect in terms of how you interact in the relationships that you have with other people, whether these relationships are family members or sexual partners that you have. So I guess the answer to the question in terms of, do Buddhists or Asian people or Asian approaches, what do we do with desire? The bottom line really for me is always having the capacity to pause and consider what your intentions are, whether there is the capacity to cause harm with this, or if you're coming at it from a place of wholesomeness. So in terms of North America, what I'm finding and what has been quite a difficult, not struggle, but has been a bit of a challenge for me to navigate, is what I'm realizing is that I'm not entirely sure if people interact with one another from a place of wholesomeness or if there is consistently an agenda. So this I've found to be quite interesting, because for me, my personality type is to be very open. I am an introvert, and I'm very much a quiet person, but when I'm out in the world and I interact with people, it takes a little while for me to get used to people. Once I am used to them, I'm very open. My personality type is very bubbly, I'm very friendly, I'm very open, I'm very giving, which can be somewhat problematic if you're surrounded by a group of people that have an agenda, which I'm not aware of. So I generally don't interact with people. I don't have an underlying agenda when I interact with people. I simply interact with them from a place of being myself. So this is quite interesting to experience this new culture and interact with people in a new place. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it now or not, but also something to just kind of put a little asterisk of awareness on is that a very big difference between Asia and the West is that there is a lot more narcissistic and sociopathic behavior in the West than there is within Asian cultures. So this is kind of a red flag to be aware of and to tread lightly with, particularly within the yoga industry. I found this to be quite interesting, and it doesn't form part of the yoga philosophy at all. Like there is the fundamental understanding that everybody has desire, but that desire should not be to consume one another. It should not be to consume for your own self-serving purposes. This is definitely not part of yoga. That is culture. That is more the consumer culture, and it doesn't form part of the umbrella of any Asian philosophies, really. So yes, I think the most important thing for me to kind of finish this off with is that it's already 12 minutes. Yes, there is sexuality within Asian understanding. It's just that sexuality is not used as a tool for games or for ownership of people, or there is a very clear understanding that this is the one thing, particularly for women, is that sexuality and emotional involvement are very often not separated. And so it's important to be aware of that. Once the desire of sexual behavior comes into the equation, there is vulnerability involved, and this has the capacity to cause great harm. So ultimately we just want to become aware of different desires, whether it's the desire to shop or the desire to own houses or cars or have families or have a particular job, and to become aware of whether they are wholesome or not, or if you're simply just getting sucked into a vortex of consuming and desiring for the sake of desiring. This is a little bit highlighted within Asian philosophy, the unending, the individuals who have an unending desire, the inability to be ever satisfied with anything, which from a Western standpoint would somewhat fall under the narcissistic personality type. This kind of inability to ever be satisfied, the unending consumer, falls very much under hungry ghosts in Asia. So hungry ghost is pretty much the shape of a human body with a very restricted throat and a tiny mouth, but a very, very large bell-shaped body, almost like a vase, like a flower vase. And it's just an individual that consumes and consumes and consumes and consumes and consumes, somewhat parasitic behavior, and it's just there's an unending emptiness that remains with the person. So I hope that answers your question. I hope it gives you some food for thought, and I hope it gives you some perspective. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out at info@salialife.com. You can find me on social media, or the website is salialife.com. Have a lovely day. Bye.